today with the baby dedications, with the beautiful music that we've been provided. I bring greetings today from Sembrandopaz, a local peace-building organization in Colombia. Ricardo Esquivia, the director, especially wanted me to thank Pasadena Mennonite Church for accompanying the organization today as we gather. He's an amazing orator who often can distill a complex sermon reflection in 2 minutes, but today you have me. And so I'll try my best to bring Ricardo into this space, but it will be longer than 2 minutes. To the parents, my children are likely going to be the loudest in the room, so please don't worry about different forms of participation. Born to an indigenous mother and an Afro-descendant father, Ricardo's life was marked by the contradictory experiences of cycles of forced displacement and state violence, as well as deep traditions of healing and care, especially as he apprenticed at a young age with his grandfather, who was a shaman. As a young child, he and his brother were forcibly displaced by the state after his father was diagnosed with leprosy and incarcerated in the capital city of Bogota, hundreds of miles away from their homeland in the Caribbean coast. And after months of living on the street, Ricardo came into contact with a program run by the Mennonite Church. While he continued to face various forms of discrimination, racism, classism, religious stigmatization, his introduction to Anabaptism gave him tools for analyzing what it means to live amidst the violence of empire and commit yourself to active nonviolence. This resonated deeply with his indigenous upbringing. He later became a key leader in the Colombian Mennonite Church as both a human rights defender and peace builder, and was consistently targeted by the state and the military with death threats that resulted in different cycles of forced displacement and exile. After years of exile, Ricardo returned to his homeland on the Caribbean coast and helped to start Sembrandopaz in the early 2000s. And so I want to start with just a little bit of background of the region, specifically in Colombia. So you can go ahead and change the slide. Montes de Maria, which you can see in the bottom map is the little purple area, is considered an intercultural territory by those who live there. It has rich histories of collective organizing and resistance that emerged from coalitions of Black, Indigenous, and campesino movements in response to the violence of colonization and enslavement. Next slide. It is the birthplace of the largest campesino movement in Colombian history, known as the National Campesino Association of Colombia, ANUC, and it became explicitly targeted by the state because of the threat that this movement posed. Ricardo returned at one point to work with the ANUC as a human rights defender and lawyer for the organization, and also to start a cooperative, but was forced once again to displace as a result of that work. Go ahead and change the slide. Between the 1990s and through 2005, particularly under the presidency of Alvaro Uribe, over 100 massacres took place, largely carried out by the paramilitaries in just this region of Montes de Maria. And it is within this context, at the height of the violence, that Ricardo returned and Sembrandopaz purchased a plot of land that had been ravaged by years of war and cattle ranching on the outskirts of Sincelejo. Sembrandopaz declared the farm a zone of peace and a sanctuary for those fleeing the war. And at the height of violence, they began planting trees. 10 years later, in 2010, on our very first visit to Montes de Maria, Jeff and I walked the trails of the young forest with Ricardo as our guide. We stopped to talk about the medicinal fruit and native trees as we walked. Go ahead and change the slide. I see a world of hunger, Ricardo explained. With climate change and the destruction of the environment, well, it is not here yet, but I see a world of hunger. And so my idea was to plant trees that people can eat from, that give people life. These are all trees that before in past generations people cultivated and subsisted on. Ricardo's vision for the farm takes seriously the call of the prophet Isaiah, of Isaias. All of you who are thirsty, come to the water. Whoever has no money, come, eat. Why spend money on what isn't food and your earnings for what doesn't satisfy? Next slide. At the end of our walk, we came to an opening overlooking the hills of Monte Maria. When I look out across this valley, Ricardo said, I can imagine it with trees planted all across those hills over there, gestured with his arm. We have to rebuild what we have destroyed. This, he said, motioning towards the mountain range before us, is the promised land. And then lowering himself to the ground, he carefully gathered dirt into his hand. All of this is sacred land. You see, the work of the grassroots is to see, feel, and grow the tree held within the seed. It is to be so close to the ground that you can feel the grass grow. That conversation has stayed with me for many years, and it continues to ground my own questions and approach to peace building. In places where people are uprooted by war or by processes that Rob Nixon has called slow violence, when the land itself displaces from under our feet, that displacement without moving, making the places we inhabit unrecognizable, as too many in this community have recently experienced. How do we live into the vision and call of the prophet Isaiah to come to the water? What practices allow us in the midst of such destruction to see and recognize the spaces where water continues to flow, to feel and in turn nurture the seeds of peace amid violence? You can change the slide. In July, Sembrandopaz will celebrate 20 years of peace-building work in Monte Maria. And these are aerial images of the farm in 2014 on the left-hand side, and then more recently in 2021. The space of devastation has been regenerated into a thick, abundant bosque seco tropical, dry tropical rainforest. Isa has a coloring book in the back if kids want to learn about the dry tropical rainforest. In December of 2016, 1 week after the Colombian government and the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia had signed a revised and historic peace accord, Ricardo turned to Matthew 16 to open a reflection among the Sembrandopaz team. You can change the slide. It had been a tumultuous month that involved the narrow rejection of the peace accords by a popular referendum vote, followed by massive and unrelenting protests advocating for the negotiations to continue that ended with the government and the FARC signing a revised accord. The atmosphere at Sembrandopaz was light and celebratory as we gathered before the holiday break, but the reflection called people into a different reality of the challenges ahead. We need to look at the context and learn to read the signs of the times Ricardo opened, referring back to Matthew 16. What we do today in the present is our future, but we cannot forget that the present is also nourished with what has already happened. He then proceeded to outline the 200-year history of inequality produced in the wake of colonial genocide and enslavement, the first displacement, as well as trace the equally long history of coalition building and collective action that had equally marked the territory. You can change the slide. He concluded, today the war has not ended. The FARC is one of the armed groups, the largest group, but it is only one. It's not that we shouldn't be excited, but we need to have this history and context clear. We need to be able to recognize the signs of the times. Across Monte Maria, people often remind me that peace signing is not the same as peace building. Just as looking at the sky is not the same as recognizing the signs that point to what time is, in the words of Jesus. Social movement leaders often invoke los tiempos, or the times, to expose the varied forms of violence that persist in the post-accord context and to make claims to peace. They often do this by contesting peace efforts that are done with too much prisa, too much hurry. As Julia, a human rights defender, reflected, and you can change the slide, here we do not work with prisa, with hurry or haste. And maybe we've not done a lot of things, but what we have done with care, with cuidado. In contrast, the implementation of the government operates with certain timelines, and those times are not our times. They are running with prisa, with hurry. What does it mean to build paz sin prisa, or what I loosely translate as slow peace? Especially in a context where the primary experience of state implementation has been one of deferred action. When social movement leaders underscored the need to slow down, to build peace slowly, without hurry or haste, they're not advocating for the continuation of sluggish bureaucracy or suggesting that the state is fulfilling their obligations quickly. Understanding slowness then requires moving beyond an understanding of time as measured, limited to clocks and deadlines or acceleration and deceleration. Instead, understanding time requires that we recognize it as relationally constituted. To read the times here requires moving beyond pointing to the sky, or in this case, clocks, deadlines, measured time, towards a deeper understanding of, in Jesus' words, what it means to recognize the signs that point to what time is. The call to slow down is a call for a fundamental shift in power relations that shape a social experience of time through the quality of encounter, attention to place and history, and ways of relating to the wider environment. Prisa shares an etymological origin with oppression. The invocation of the times foregrounds the ancestral history of the territory as a place of liberatory refuge, of collective resistance, of solidarity that persists today. And to be able to read the signs of the times requires entering into this expansive present, a multi-generational present, where living memories of ancestral struggles and desires for dignified futures are held together. This relational understanding of slowness is both a way of inhabiting the world and a mode of attention. Jocabet Canoles, a youth organizer, explained to me that how prior to the massacre in her community, the land went eerily silent, warning people of the impending violence. In the wake of that horrible evening, as the community gathered for a vigil, she explained how they could hear the land weeping alongside of them. The earth also cried out, she reflected. The earth suffered too. The war has been violent to the environment, and we must reconcile with her. For individuals like Jocabet, violence and peace are experienced as more than human. Jocabet's reflection calls us to read Isaiah not as merely figurative, but reflective of a relational reality. Attending to land as living and sentient allows us to hear the land weep and celebrate alongside us. You will be brought back in peace. Even the mountains and the hills will burst into song before you. All the trees of the field will clap their hands. Both Jocabet and the prophet Isaiah remind us that the times of states are not the times of forests. There is a profound urgency in the call to slow down, to take notice, and to tend territorial relations of care in the midst of violence. Life is at stake. Over the last 10 years, Sembrandopaz has helped to organize and facilitate a broad-based coalition known as the Regional Space for Peace Building. The coalition now has over 100 representatives from Afro-descendant, indigenous, campesino, youth, and LGBTQIA movements. You can, actually go back. Or this is fine, you can leave it on this one. The Espacio Regional has met every single month without fail for the last 10 years. Throughout the pandemic, in the face of heightened political violence, in the midst of drought and floods, and across multiple presidential administrations. They refer to their process of sustained dialogue as encounters with equals who have become divided. It is powerful to sit in a room with older campesino farmers working alongside trans youth towards the vision of peace in this rural territory of Colombia. The coalition has built power from the ground up. Most recently, they launched the country's first restorative justice council to engage with the work of Colombia's Transitional Justice Tribunal. And as a result of a decade of organizing, they were able to facilitate a dialogue with one of the multinational corporations known for dispossessing campesinos of their land during the war. This last December, the logging company returned 400 hectares of that land, which is now being transformed into a civil society-led reserve, the Morrocoy Reserve. This daily and patient struggle to cultivate Sowing Peace derives from and deepens an ethics of attention. Moral dispositions capable of noticing, affirming, and tending the relations and abundant life that exist in places like Montes de Maria, in Palestine, in Sudan, in DRC, and in Los Angeles, on the lands where the living memories of the Tongva people are held and persist today. This work emerges from a grounded hope born of transgenerational struggle to build peace from and for the territory. It's hard today to end on a note of hope. Hope feels far. The Israeli state's relentless genocidal campaign in Gaza continues. The entire population in Gaza now faces imminent risk of famine as a result of manufactured starvation. In Sudan and the Congo, campaigns of ethnic cleansing are increasing. And here in our communities, families live in terror of ICE raids, separation, and forced disappearances carried out by the Trump administration's authoritarian regime. The recent ruling by the Supreme Court opens Oak Flat. And yet, as I've learned from my mentors like Ricardo across Colombia, it is precisely through attending to the relations that animate and sustain collective action that a grounded hope through struggle is nurtured. Ricardo has called upon peace builders to become vigías de la esperanza, vigías of hope. Vigía, as it is used here, doesn't really have a translation in English, but it comes from the Latin word vigil. And according to the Oxford dictionaries, a vigil is when you stay alert to guard something, but a vigil can also be solemn, as when a candlelight vigil is held for victims of a tragedy. Vigil comes from the Latin word for awake, and all its meanings include the idea of wakefulness. You can change the slide. To build peace, then, is to be continuously wakeful to the possibilities of hope found in the weave of everyday life. Or in the words of Ricardo, we have to become vigías de la esperanza, vigías of hope. We have to be able to see small, practical things that show us that this is possible. Maybe I will never see it, but I believe we will achieve it. This is hope, and we embody it. So there's two offerings today. There's a special offering for Sembrandopaz in honor and celebration of their 20-year anniversary, which is in the basket with green. And then the offering for Pasadena Mennonite Church is in the basket without the green, so that you can kind of understand as we pass those baskets around which basket goes for what contribution. So I think we have the two people who will be sending around those baskets. I just ask that we ground our offering in prayer. Giver of abundant life, may these gifts embody your work in the world to deepen peace, to generate conditions of justice, and to cultivate healing. With gratitude and in your name we pray. Amen.